Okay, welcome everyone to our monthly meetup for our New York City chapter, which today is a Globinar. So that means we have members from all over the global chamber and from about 565 markets. Not everyone is here today, but could be. So in a recent New York City Advisory Board meeting, I asked my team what topics would be important to address. And one of my great advisory board members, Danielle Orcott, who works at Corpay, which happens to be one of our longest chapter members, suggested our topic today. And so because of her insight and active participation, I asked her to co-moderate the meeting. So just briefly, I'm going to tell you about Danielle, who you'll see on the screen already, is a national account manager at Corpay, which is a cross-border payments company, and she assists corporations to navigate the challenges of foreign currency. So Danielle, without further ado, as they say, I'm going to let you do the next part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, so much for having me on the panel today. We're really excited to welcome Paul Charles. He's actually the CEO, president, board member, and co-founder of American Battery Factory. And he's also a global chamber member. He's going to be talking to us today about enabling energy independence for America. A little info on Paul's impressive background. He's the inventor of globally commercialized technology. He has 30 years experience in the private and public sectors, which he's focused on energy, portable commuting, nanotechnology, tech, finance, manufacturing, real estate, which he focused on development and construction and mining and other industries. I think pretty much, Paul, you've hit most of the industries out there. He structured multiple companies, investment entities, and funds focused on energy, again, nanotechnology, real estate. He co-created an energy company dealing with Pemex and CFE and Mexico's national oil and electric companies. Paul also founded the first portable commuting peripheral companies based in Silicon Valley, Arizona, and Switzerland. He developed, patented, and brought to market the first universal docking station for portable computers. Paul also created the first external Bay replication products and commercialized them with IBM globally. A little bit about Paul's background. He graduated with honors in finance, accounting, and economics from Brigham Young University. And I was impressed to read about his volunteer work with the Boy Scouts, where he inspires young men to reach their full potential. So we're very excited to have him. Welcome, Paul. We look forward to your meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I seem like I'm much older now after you read that, but thank you again for that introduction. The topic today is incredibly relevant. I just returned last night from a renewable energy show in Southern California at the Anaheim Convention Center, where they had over 35,000 people in attendance. And it was a beehive of incredible interest and focus, like, frankly, I've never seen before. It's a very relevant time to be talking about energy independence here in America. Hopefully on future opportunities, we'll talk about opportunities to help other countries as well, too. At the end of the day, this is really a national security issue. I'm going to go through a few slides, and then we're going to open it up for, I hope, will be a healthy Q&A opportunity. Some context and background of kind of where did we come from and how did we get to the situation that we're in today. The power grid in America is really a remarkable lattice of connectivity. It's almost 100 years old, believe it or not. And there's about 5 grids spread out across America. But in reality, we really just talk about 2 of these. Some statistics that are kind of very relevant to today's conversation is that in general, the grid has been powered mainly by fossil fuels. And when you look at it from that perspective, only about 1/3 of the power that's actually available makes its way into electricity. So we have a long, a long ways to go in order to improve those efficiencies, and renewables really allows us to do that. I'll be referring to California a number of times today. I'm originally from California, and they tend to be somewhat of a leader, at least domestically, in terms of setting trends. And in the last couple of weeks, it's been an interesting situation of what's occurred with them. They announced a ban on gas-powered cars by 2035, and it's a progressive percentage, but by 2035, the idea is that they do not want to have sale of new vehicles unless they are non-gas. And shortly thereafter, a couple of weeks ago, they then issued essentially a giant ask: please don't recharge your electric vehicles. So here on one side, they're saying we're getting rid of ICE, which is internal combustion engine vehicles, and we're going to replace those with electric vehicles. And then literally they say, well, but don't charge them. And the reason that they said that is that the grid is just not capable of really sustaining the EV, the electric vehicle revolution, unless it is improved dramatically. Just a few other stats on this. I'm sure folks recall last year what happened in Texas. It was a very difficult situation when 40% of the electrical capacity literally went out in that region. The grids, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, are really connected together, but the challenge is that we need so much more power today than frankly we needed 100 years ago. And they only have the capacity to transfer a certain amount of energy, and we're literally maxing that out. Oftentimes you'll see politicians say, well, let's just increase the production. Let's just get more production, more energy into the marketplace. And frankly, that's not the best approach to that. And let me explain that. If we look at the graph here on the right-hand side here, this actually is representative of what's happened in California. California has required that residential dwellings have solar panels on top of their roofs. And so in the middle of the day, there's wonderful power generation. However, that's not when the bulk of the power is actually needed. And so you have this inverted use versus demand situation that's been created. And believe it or not, California has actually been paying other states, including Utah and Arizona, to take this excess energy. Well, they finally realized that's not a sustainable model, okay, by any stretch. And so they've passed legislation this year, which will go into effect this coming year in 2023, which will require that commercial and multifamily structures actually have energy storage or battery storage in those buildings or dwellings, so that they can capture this excess energy that's generated during the day, and they don't have to pay for other states to take it away. So let's talk about the optimization opportunity that there is and need and demand for the grid. Battery storage is a wonderful part of the overall equation. It's not the end all, but it can certainly do a wonderful progression in terms of making sure that we have power when we need to have it. It also allows renewable energies to be more viable, and it helps to decarbonize the economy. When you really think about it, you have wind, you have solar, you have hydro, you have other types of renewables on that. But at the end of the day, they're not 100% reliable. The wind is not always going to blow. Sun is not always going to shine. So you need to be able to have other technologies that work in harmony with this. The opportunity for battery storage is it allows storage to be contained, and then it's truly almost at 100% usage as it's dispersed out by whoever is going to be using it at that time. The utility companies really like that, because instead of having these peaks and valleys associated with usage and power generation, it levels out. And if you look at the graph once again on the right-hand side, balanced grid demand is that green line, basically flat and simple and very easy to produce to. The challenge is the utilities have to produce at the highest level of the peak power, which is coincidentally the time frame in which they have the least amount of typical renewable power available. An example of some progressive thinking is a company on the East Coast called Exelon, and their utility. And rather than building a new peaker plant, is what they call these power plants, in order to help sustain a situation in which the power spikes, rather than spending $200 million on that and taking at least 6 years to build that, they spent $40 million and essentially built a battery storage park. So they saved 5 years and they saved $160 million. That's good use of capital. Let me talk a little bit about the federal government. The US last summer came out with a national blueprint for their vision for the next 10 years of how the US government can help to create a domestic supply chain for batteries. So that was a year ago. And what's happened in the last few weeks has been truly, truly remarkable. With the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, yes, there's a lot of aspects to that, from lowering drug pricing and helping on the deficit. But the area we're going to talk about today really focuses on enhancing domestic energy production, but doing it in an ESG friendly way. Just to give you a little idea, if you look at the incentives that are provided now, and these are income tax credits or production tax credits, for every battery cell that's produced, there's a $35 production tax credit for every 1 kilowatt. So to put that in context, if you have say a 350 amp battery, there's about $35 of a tax credit that's available on that. That also then goes up into a modular level. And so what happens is you have a battery cell, and those are connected together into a module, and typically into an end product that somebody can actually buy. At that level, there's a $10 per kilowatt production tax credit that's provided. The government also has provided through this legislation 10% of total cost tax credits in order to help the supply chain, whether it's in-ground assets or whether it's the processing of that. The IRA is a big, big deal. As I mentioned, I was at the show in Southern California the last few days here, and that was the talk. This allows America to be competitive right off the bat with China, and it also provides an environment in which more capital is available for growth. So in terms of energy demand, it truly is unlimited. As much as we can produce globally is being spoken for and being tied up with offtake agreements as quickly as it's being made available. Bank of America is projecting literally in the next 2.5 years that the global supply of battery cells will be sold out. And I can personally attest to that as well. Some context in terms of really where we're at. Asia, specifically China, controls over 70%, almost 80% of the global supply of lithium-ion batteries. Think about that for a moment. It's batteries have kind of been equated to like the new gold or the new oil, and to have one country that's 70 to 80% controlling of that is something which every country in the world should certainly take note of. If you look at some of the statistics down here, yes, the US will be adding additional gigafactories, but nothing in comparison to what Asia has and will be doing. Europe's actually moving ahead much faster than the US. So with American Battery Factory, let me explain what we're doing, which is quite unique. We're standing up a network of safe lithium cell gigafactories across the US. And these are geographically decentralized. And the reason that we took that approach is because usually when you hear about these battery factories being announced, they're 100 gigawatt massive production, and they take thousands of acres and usually 10,000 or more workers. Well, the challenge is those locations that support that, especially with the power, oftentimes are in a rural environment. And frankly, you just can't get enough people in that area in order to sustain that. So our approach is we've gone to a modular, decentralized approach where our factories are incredibly automated and robotic. They only take between 300 and 1,000 employees. And that way you can set up your factories where they need to be. We also use rapid construction technology, which I'll get to in a moment. We're onshoring the entire supply chain to the US over the next 36 months. So we will not have to rely upon China for our raw ingredients. And yes, that also includes lithium, and that's a whole nother conversation of opportunity. We will be announcing shortly our global headquarters, which will include an R&D center with approximately 100 of the best PhDs that really understand the technology that frankly was invented here and we pushed to China years ago. We'll also have something called a foundry, which is a gigafactory that specifically stood up in order to scale and enhance US technologies. That is not available in America right now. So what's happened is you've had a decade or more of wonderful inventions, great technologies that are literally sitting in laboratories, national laboratories, private laboratories, and they can't scale it because really the only way to go and validate and to work out the bugs in scaling is to go to China. And that's obviously not a good option for many reasons. In terms of our focus in the target areas, is that we just make the battery cells themselves, okay? We don't make the packs, we don't make the modules, we don't make the end products. We're very focused on that, and we do not compete with our customers. So at the end of the day, we're able to have a large volume of production with very competitive pricing. We're focused in 3 areas. One is battery storage, which is called BESS. We also have the ability with our cells that it supports certain types of electric vehicles, mainly those applications that last many, many years, such as trucks and buses and mining equipment, things of that nature. And the third area is US military and government. As we said earlier, this is a national security priority. The US government military, they're not supposed to buy any cells from China for really for security issues, and we can have another conversation relative to that. Let me talk about some of the unique aspects in which we're able to stand up our factories very, very quickly. There's a technology which is called a tension membrane technology that is placed on top of a aluminum substructure. And if you look down at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen here, this is an image of Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' space company. This entire building is about 250,000 square feet, and it took 11 months from literally when they started to push dirt to the point where they moved in. Our factories will look like the image which was right above here as well. Tesla has used the same technology, and they stood up 137,000 square foot assembly plant for their automobiles in 3 weeks. All these, the structure themselves is made in a factory, so we have incredibly good tolerances and very good quality. The structures are highly insulated, and they do allow for natural light to come in as well. They're Cat 5 rated, so 180 mile an hour sustained winds, seismic rated, so if you have earthquakes or so, the building's not going to be falling down. In fact, this technology has been deployed in over 100 countries around the world in 13,000 structures, and they're typically the structures that everybody goes to, when and if there's a natural calamity. Vanuatu island change in the South Pacific. The only buildings left on the island were the tension membrane technologies. Another reason that we very much like this technology is it's good to the environment. There's essentially no waste associated with this at all. As we stand up our factories, we'll have essentially a gigafactory in a box. It's about 600 to 700 shipping containers that show up. The building comes out of this, and we can literally stand up the structure in about 10 weeks. And that's a 500,000 square foot module. Let's talk a little bit about chemistries as well too, because when people talk about lithium batteries, they kind of take this approach where it's just one chemistry and it's all the same. That's like saying every car is the same. There's a wide variety of different types of technologies. For discussions today, let me just really kind of break it down into 2 different buckets. So when we talk about lithium chemistries, we talk about a lithium formulation that has nickel and cobalt. And cobalt is very high in energy density, and so it has some wonderful characteristics associated with that. The chemistry that we are focusing on does not have cobalt and does not have nickel, and there's attributes associated with that as well that we'll talk about in a few minutes. So please do keep in mind that there are many different types of lithium chemistries out there. But the two differentiating factors typically is it doesn't have cobalt, doesn't have nickel. If so, then it typically has a high amount of energy density, but it doesn't last as long. And there's some significant safety differences associated with that. And the technology that we're focused on is called lithium iron phosphate. It's essentially fertilizer mixture, okay? And it lasts a very long time and it's very safe. In fact, let me show you this graph right here that if indeed one of the cells is punctured, it literally within a couple seconds will soar to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's lithium battery cells that have cobalt and nickel in them. And if you look at what happens if a cell that's used with lithium iron phosphate, LFP, once again, does not have cobalt, does not have nickel, it literally only goes up a couple degrees. So what do you want, 800 degrees Fahrenheit or a couple degrees? It's pretty straightforward in terms of the safety. These cells can be quite dramatic. We've literally tested them and seen them to be, in the good side, shall we say, a blowtorch, and in the bad side, a hand grenade. There's a lot of pent-up energy associated with lithium cells that have nickel and cobalt in them. So let's talk specifically about the LFP aspect. Very, very safe. You can literally puncture these things. You can shoot them with a gun and they're not going to blow up. They may smolder a bit, but you're not going to have the same type of reaction that you do with cobalt and nickel-based lithium chemistries. One other thing I'd really like to mention is that cobalt is what we call a near conflict material. And what we mean by that is that most of it comes out of the Congo, and there's about 400,000 modern child slaves that are involved with that whole process. It's a horrible situation. They're trying to improve upon it. And then on the nickel side, 20% of the world's nickel comes out of Russia. So fortunately, we don't have to deal with either of those. The lifespan associated with LFP cells are typically 2 to 3, sometimes 4 times longer than chemistries that have nickel and cobalt in them as well. The technology and chemistry was actually invented in Texas a couple decades ago, and we literally pushed it over to China. And the Chinese have done a phenomenal job of enhancing and scaling the technology. So as we onshore and bring back this technology, there is a lot we can absolutely learn from the Chinese. Let's talk briefly about supply chain. If people didn't know what supply chain was, certainly during the pandemic, everybody gets supply chain. In terms of the energy sector and battery cells, there's 3 different areas. One is the upstream. That's essentially all the in-ground assets, like lithium and cobalt, nickel and graphite, things of that nature. We play in the midstream area, in which the materials are mined, they're brought in-house and then processed so that we can then make battery cells out of these things. And one thing I didn't mention is that typically when people think of battery cells, they think of these AA cylindrical approach to a cell. We've chosen to go with something called a prismatic, which is a square or rectangular housing, which has a larger capacity capability, and it's much easier to be able to make end products out of that. It lasts longer, and there's a number of reasons that we like that format better. So the midstream, once again, is processing the materials, creating the cells that we then provide to the downstream, which is something called a pack integrator or solution provider. And that's where they take these cells, they weld them together, they put on a computer pack, wrap some plastic around it. You can buy it at Costco. One thing that we're moving forward with, and especially with the IRA, we're having a lot of successes, is essentially ingredient branding. We want everybody to ask the question when you buy anything that's electrified, where are the batteries from? Are they from China or are they from the US? And Intel has done a phenomenal job over the years of having people ask, what's powering your computer, your laptop computer? Is it an Intel? And if so, then the standard that's associated with. And that's something that we're moving forward with our customers. Once again, we never compete with our customers. We just make the cells, go to the pack integrators who make the end products with that. And it's really been an honor to be able to work with companies that see and support the US aspect of this. Last slide here, I think, is part of the way in which we're able to accomplish so much and to be able to have a differentiating factor is we are using artificial intelligence, and that's an important aspect of the overall manufacturing supply chain of this. Machine learning and having data collection is incredibly important, so much so that the chain of custody concept is integral to what we're doing. In other words, what I'm meaning is every single cell that we produce, we're able to track back to the mine that the lithium came out of, and along with all the other ingredients, and have that included on every cell in a QR code. So that chain of custody really gives us the ability to track if there's challenges, if there's issues, and to be able to make better quality products at the end of the day. That's the kind of the quick overview of this whole thing. I'd love to be able to see what type of questions you may have.
Thank you, Paul. We really appreciate your meeting. And we have our first question from Bob Dumpy, and then Susan will open up the meeting to members to ask additional questions. Thank you.
So Bob, go ahead and unmute if you're hearing us at the moment. You know, Danielle and Paul, he told me he was moving around. Let me just ask. Oh, Bob, there we go. Can't quite hear you.
There we go. Now you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. So Paul, great presentation. Really a ton of interesting stuff. Not even sure where to begin, except let me talk about two questions. One is, you talk about job creation through all of this, because it seems to me there need to be an enormous number of plants built, and I know there'll be automation and all, but still there must be a lot of jobs being created here. And then the other part is, you know, even the Energizer bunny runs dry at some point, and those batteries need to be replaced, and then there's dead batteries lying around. What happens with all of those?
Excellent topics of conversation. Job creation absolutely is very important to us. Keep in mind that our focus is on providing enhanced opportunities from a employment perspective. Anything that can be done by a robot will be done by a robot. Anything that can be automated will be done with automation, whether it's software or hardware or whatever it may be. What we do is we actually train individuals in order to run and control those manufacturing processes. One thing that's very important to us is our apprenticeship program. It's based upon the Swiss model. I had an office over there for a number of years, and it really works quite well. Whereas we support from the high school opportunities all the way through PhD candidates, where they're able to have an opportunity to be in a US manufacturing environment that looks like this. And there's not many of those, okay? And so in terms of the quality of jobs, these are incredibly well-paying jobs, technically, capable, and also it has the opportunity to, to go into other industries once you understand the robotics aspects and the automation aspect of this. The situation also is that this is very similar to semiconductor business, so it's very capital intensive, heavy on the CapEx. And so from that perspective, we can literally place these plants almost anywhere in the world because the labor is not that big a deal for us. So essentially what I'm saying is that we pay extremely well because we want to have the best, and we want people to stay with our companies, and we want them to be able to have an opportunity to migrate to other of our network of gigafactories in the US on a global basis. Now, in terms of the recycling aspect, what do you do at the end of life? That is a great question. And as the world becomes more and more electrified, you're going to see more and more of these batteries that have an end of life. And what do you do with them? And let me talk in a couple different realms with this. First of all, the batteries that have cobalt and nickel, it's a profitable. It can be a profitable venture to extract those key ingredients and then put those back into the ecosystem, so we don't have to mine as much materials out of the earth. And that's starting to happen right now. And over the next few years, as there's more and more EVs that go into the marketplace, we're going to have literally hundreds of millions of battery packs that'll be part of this recycling process on that. And that's really important to be able to help scale the production of batteries, because to rely all on new, fresh, mining is a difficult thing to really deal with. A typical mine can easily take 10 or 20 years to get certified and brought to the point where they actually have processed materials. Now, what we're doing using lithium iron phosphate, once again, no cobalt, no nickel, we've been able to create an environment in which our batteries last for 10,000 cycle life. In reality, it's a 30-year battery. So we're good stewards of the minerals and the ingredients that we use. So they literally do not have to be recycled again for 30 years. So just wanted to give some context associated with that. And the technologies that we have seen and are continuing to see in the marketplace are continuing to be enhanced, and they can be very ESG friendly as well.
So Bob, did he answer your questions? I think you did. You must have. I have one question, Paul, and I'm waiting for people to raise it. I don't know, we can't raise our hands in here, but this whole ingredient branding concept, of course, I'm familiar with Intel Inside, and I would assume everyone on this Globinar is, but is that something that, you guys are extremely unique in doing this ingredient branding and, made in the US? I mean, I love it. I think it's a great idea.
We honestly, I don't know of any other cell manufacturers that have taken this approach. And we think that's a very important aspect of stewardship, that you should know where the ingredients of the things you buy come from. And now with the IRA being passed and having the financial incentives on it, it is a big deal now. And it allows us to be competitive in the marketplace, and it really allows us to build an ecosystem out that will expand far beyond where we're at right now. There are areas that may be displaced as the EV revolution takes hold and really soars. However, there will be many new jobs created that will be there to support the whole ecosystem that we just talked about on that. So being supportive of what goes on to the US, we think ingredient branding and asking, where are the batteries from is a very important aspect of this.
Great. Okay, thank you. So who has a question for Paul?
I do.
Anyone? That would be Doug Brunke. Yay.
Yeah, I raised my hand, but
thank
it
you.
may not.
You know what? I don't know how to raise hands. You'll have to teach me that later. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I know
you
how to
just
do
go
it.
into
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us.
You just go into the more area and then you just raise your hand. So it's the same area typically as the chat. It depends on whether you're on your laptop or your
See,
phone.
I know it on Clubhouse, but I don't know it here. Doug,
Yeah.
please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to get my picture up there. It took a little bit of time. Paul, you're amazing. So, and as a chemical engineer, I appreciated the chemistry part of it as well, too. A couple questions. One is you raise the issue of lithium mining and mining in general, like the cobalt mining in the DRC. So what's the solution on that relative to lithium? Are there huge deposits of lithium that somebody should be working on? I know our Western Rare Earths is working on different rare earth opportunities, but I'm not sure that involves lithium. And so I'm wondering what we should be knowing on that side of things. And then the other question I had was relative to alternative technologies, whether it's other chemistry batteries, whether it's hydrogen or cold fusion, which, as a BYU graduate, the University of Utah stepped into that a couple decades ago. But I did see that some university in California just announced some sort of a cold fusion progress. So I'm wondering how those kinds of things might impact the battery market. Sorry for two questions.
No, that's great. And let me answer the second question first on this. Keep in mind that my philosophy on this is that it's going to take many different types of sources of energy in order to really round out the global needs. Batteries are a wonderful way to store energy, but how you create that is a whole nother opportunity that will continue to expand in so many different ways. It was interesting, just recently there was an announcement of $500 million that's being placed into a company in Utah so they can create massive amounts of hydrogen that'll actually go in old salt mines. And there's hydrogen vehicles. I recently visited a facility in Arizona called Nikola, and they have hydrogen, they have electric vehicles. And the idea behind the hydrogen is that they actually have an incredible amount of power available with that. And part of the support of the US government is they're setting up the ecosystem and just the infrastructure to be able to support hydrogen. Keep in mind, we've had over a century to be able to build out our infrastructure for getting gasoline and diesel. You just don't do that overnight. So hydrogen, I think, is one element of that. I spoke with some people a few months ago that actually have an entire city in Korea that's based upon the hydrogen economy. And so that is an area of great interest. On the nuclear side, there's multiple technologies that are being commercialized and being tested in Kimmerer, Wyoming. Gates and his funding group are moving forward with building the first nuclear facility in I'm not sure how long, but a very, very long time, that's based upon new technologies. There's all kinds of different ways of generation. There's a group out of Switzerland called Energy Vault that is as simple a concept as what you can imagine, where they literally raise these large blocks of concrete that are made from recycled materials up at a great height when energy is very inexpensive. And when energy is expensive, they then lower these blocks and they create energy associated with that. I could literally spend hours talking about all the different ways in which we've been able to creatively increase production. And I think it's important to be able to have a lot of different sources on this. But ultimately, you want to be a good steward of the energy that's being created. And battery storage is a wonderful, easy way to really deal with that.
So what you're saying is that there's going to be a lot of solutions. The market for lithium batteries is going to be large and continue to grow. And we need to have a strategic thought process around the sourcing of the raw materials and the technology and the manufacturing for those.
Absolutely. Let me talk specifically about lithium now to answer your question on that. Lithium is one of the most plentiful elements throughout the universe, right? The challenge is to extract it and then process it into a format in which we can actually use it for battery or energy storage. And that's essentially called battery grade lithium. A few of the areas globally that have a tremendous amount of concentration of lithium is the triangle, is what it's referred to in South America, where it's Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. Massive deposits of lithium down in that area. And the way that they extract that, frankly, isn't the best in the environment. They use evaporative techniques in which they flood these huge plains with a lot of solution that has high concentrations of lithium, and they wait for Mother Nature to essentially to evaporate that. And so while it looks beautiful, it's not the best thing for the environment. There's also a process, it's typically done in Australia and other areas around the world, in which it's a hard rock mining, in which they're able to take the hard rock out, and they use a smeltering process in order to reduce that down to a lithium that can be utilized in the manufacturing process. The earlier solution is referred to as a brine, and you're able to see that in other areas around the world. Here in the States, they've identified mines that have been in place for many, many years, and the lithium is seeped into that water. So they're able to extract that water from old mines and process that through. You have the Salton Sea in the Imperial Valley in Southern California that is very rich in lithium. And there's a process that's being set up right now to extract lithium from that. There's also companies out there that have tailings that are 100-150-year-old. And folks that are not familiar with tailings, essentially that's the leftovers of a previous mining experience. And these things just sit around. And part of the remediation is typically now required that you get rid of these tailings, but there are 150 years or more of tailings laying around the US. There's a company that's been able to figure out a process to extract lithium with that as well too, which is wonderful. It's a win-win all the way around on that. And then the world's largest deposit of lithium is a place called Thacker Pass. And I was the opportunity to go out there just a few weeks ago. So if you go to Reno and drive about 2 hours east to a place called Winnemucca, and then drive an hour north to nowhere, that's where Thacker Pass is located. It's on the border of Oregon as well as Nevada. And it's an old cauldron that hundreds of millions of years old, but it had all the right ingredients that allowed the water millions of years ago to stay in that valley for some period of time. The lithium then distilled down into the clay, and it has very, very high levels of lithium concentrate in there. The company has been at this perfecting the extraction process for over a decade. The area was actually known back in the 1970s when Chevron was there and drilled over 1,100 individual sampling sites. And it was interesting because their comments were essentially this nuisance of a material called lithium. It's like, there's just way too much of this, and they had no interest, saw no value in it. But you move forward a few decades and something that was of no value then has great value now. And there's a lot of information that's been in the press from NPR to you name it. And that's why I personally wanted to go out there. Spent 2 days with PhDs, one of which literally got her PhD on Thacker Pass itself. Had the opportunity to talk to Native American representatives as well. And it is really an amazing example of how, from an ESG perspective, you can mine and use the resources that are here on this earth in a good, responsible way. And so, as we continue to expand that area, it is a massive, massive area and the largest in the entire world. So what I'm saying is that, and we haven't even talked about Canada, which is another conversation. There's many different places lithium. What we need to do is get our production levels up so we can process more. The challenge has been, it just takes forever to get these things certified. So the quicker and faster we can implement the technologies to enhance these extraction processes, the better. The US has been able to define and prototype extraction capabilities that are 90% faster than what's going on typically in South America with the evaporative approaches to that. Well, last thing I did want to mention is the Great Salt Lake. They've been that's another source of lithium as well too. And just in the press in the last couple of weeks, $250 million was just invested into that process to enhance and support that as well too. So I'm hoping to get in the sense and feel where lithium, yeah, it's a challenge right now, and it will continue to be. We'll have multiple sources of this, and it's American ingenuity, which will allow us to increase the volume, do it in an ESG friendly way as well too.
Amazing. And I'll turn it over to somebody else to ask a question. But as you were talking, I thought China controlled everything, but they actually control 80% of the world's raw material refining of lithium. But most of the reserves are not in China. They're number 6 in the world by country, only 4.5 million tons. Bolivia is number 1, 3.5 times larger than China reserves. Argentina number 2, Chile number 3, and US number 4, Australia number 5, China number 6. So the reserves aren't the problem. It's the refining, it looks like.
Exactly. And let me just take a minute, if you wouldn't mind, and explain some of the challenges that the Chinese have and some of the patterns that they've been able to establish over the last few decades. Is that they've gone out into the world and identified in-ground assets. They've secured mining rights, leasing rights, or they've created environments in which monies that they've loaned to these countries are then guaranteed by the in-ground assets. And when the default occurs, they go in and have access to that. So bottom line is the Chinese have had access and continue to have access to a lot of different minerals all over the world. They have, I believe they still have the largest merchant fleet in the world. So they fill up their ships, they take it back to China, process it in some very challenging ways from a U.S. perspective. I'm trying to be kind here. And they are trying to get better with that because they realize that they're not winning if they're hurting their own environment as well too. So they process the materials in China, they create the battery cells, and then they have to ship those to the rest of the world. So if you look at what we're doing in the US, where we're bringing that entire supply chain to the US, it's a matter of shipping products from California, Utah, Nevada, or wherever, to a location that's processed, make the cells, and then we ship it domestically. It doesn't take months and months on the water. It doesn't require, the level of infrastructure that China has put into place. And that's another reason why we can't be competitive, especially as we add US innovation to the mix.
Amazing information. Thank you.
No problem. If there's not any other questions right now, there's an area I wanted to talk just briefly about. But please, I'd rather answer questions.
Yes, sorry, I was thanking and I was muted. Sorry about that. I wanted to thank Doug for his great questions and Paul for your answers. So as Paul said, anyone else has a question? If not, Paul will continue speaking for another 3 or 4 minutes and then we'll close this out. I think, Paul, go ahead. Let's not waste time. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. A lot of folks, have seen on YouTube video of electric vehicles and hoverboards and e-bike scooters, the whole bit catching on fire. And I just wanted to speak briefly about that. In the first week of November, I'll be speaking at a safety conference, and just want to give you a little taste flavor of this as well too. Now, in terms of really what's happening on this, it's the statistics are still being tabulated and are evolving, but typically between 1 in 5 million and 1 in 10 million cells will have some kind of a failure in that. And what I mean by a failure, it essentially will stop functioning, or it may cause what we call a thermal event, which is a nice way to say a fire. Okay. If you think about it right now, the average electric vehicle has about 3,500 cylindrical cells, and these are small cells. These are not the types of cells that we make, which are larger prismatic cells. So if you think about that, for every 3,000 EVs that go off the line, there will be some type of a failure that occurs. But the positive aspect of this is usually it takes multiple failures occurring simultaneously for a thermal event or a fire to occur. And let me explain the reason behind these things. Is that essentially it's poor quality is really the driving force behind this. China typically has at least 4 different grades of cells, and the electric vehicle market, they typically get the best grade of cells because they have the largest market and largest demand associated with that. If you're a smaller player that needs to have them for a hoverboard or an e-bike or a scooter or whatever, you essentially get the leftovers. So you get the lower quality cells. And that's why you see, so many of these particular, personal EVs that have thermal events associated with that. So I just wanted to explain the reasoning behind that. And then how it's being dealt with. And this is a topic for a whole nother conversation of, can you imagine being a firefighter in today's environment? You go into a home and they may have a battery storage device in their garage. They may have it in their house. You don't know what chemistry this is. It's a very, very challenging environment, to say the least. And so I'm a huge proponent of getting some national standards out there so that there's a differentiation between chemistries. If you have a chemistry that doesn't have cobalt and nickel, just a normal fire extinguisher will put it out immediately, not a problem whatsoever. If you don't, it's a whole nother ball game. Let me give you a couple of statistics and what's being done. In Europe, when an EV catches on fire, they literally pick the entire EV up and put it in the dumpster of water for 2 days. Think about that, okay? Is that a good solution? Probably not, okay? But that's what they're doing right now. US has no standardization, as we talked about. A typical fire in an ICE, internal combustion engine vehicle, you can put it out in 10 minutes, boom, it's just there. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of video of ICE fires going on, because they go out so quickly. Now let's talk about EV. The average burn time in an EV is 8 hours and takes 20,000 gallons to quote unquote extinguish it. The fire extinguishers,
I go all the way up
pardon me,
with enough stuff to carry me through.
another aspect of this is the firefighters also need to have PPE equipment associated with that. And there's some nasty gases that are created. One in particular is called hydrogen fluoride. It's extremely toxic, corrosive, and it's colorless as well too. It causes cancer, carcinogen as well. And let me mention two other quick things here. They've had situations in which an EV has been involved in an accident and it goes to an insurance salvage yard and just sits there. They've had situations 3 weeks later, a fire starts, okay? And I actually talked to a group with safety experts a week ago, Monday, and they've had situations in which the fire has restarted 5 times. So we're truly playing with fire, right? We need to differentiate between the chemistries and treat them appropriately and get national standards so we so we know how to deal with it as homeowners, as commercial building owners, but also as firefighters going in to address these concerns.
Wow, Paul, so many facts and data for people. I think it's great. And, not only with, with the recording of this presentation, I think people will be learning a lot about this. Can you keep us informed on this whole initiative about standardizing?
It's just starting. We were very fortunate last year. Congressman Curtis, he and another congressman have a caucus that's relative to conservative legislation on the energy aspect of this. And he actually asked us to be a part and to create the amendments, which he was kind enough to submit for the infrastructure bill. And part of what we submitted is exactly what we just outlined, where we believe that it's very important to identify and to differentiate how things are treated based upon chemistries. One final note on that, shipping. In order to ship a lithium battery, whether it's an LFP battery that doesn't have cobalt, doesn't have nickel, it's treated the same way as something which has incredibly high energy density. And frankly, if it is punctured, it's going to catch on fire, it's going to explode. All those are treated the same way. And then you have lead acid, which is being shipped all over the world, and it's spillable, it has its own issues or so. We need to have some sense and some intelligence in terms of how we write our legislation and how we ship our product out, because it'll help to lower our costs and it'll create a much safer environment just for being able to utilize battery storage.
Okay, that's great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul. It was really informative. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else learned a lot. And I want to thank Danielle for having the idea for this program. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And Cesar and Doug leading us to Paul, because I think it's the first time I've met Paul as another member of the Global Chamber. So just an example of how the Global Chamber works. So wanted to mention to everybody left on the call that the New York City chapter will have another Globinar coming up on October 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. London time, 10 a.m. LA time. It's the author and member Matthew Sawyer, who will be addressing the misperception that the US is one big monolithic market. Matthew's a pretty cool guy. He teaches at Columbia University and also NYU. He's pretty well known. And, you know, he's going to be addressing issues about anyone wanting to enter the US market and educating them on the difference in the regions around this country. So please join us then on October 20th. And if you have any questions, email us at, you know, everyone knows how to get in touch with Doug Brunke probably and Cesar, but email me at susan@globalchamber.org. And thanks, everybody. It's great to be on today. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.